If you're learning to paint, you'll need paint. Now there are thousands of paints to choose from, and that choice can be overwhelming. I'm going to tell you what's in paint so you'll know what to look for, and you'll be able to choose a paint that's right for your price point and your style. When you're trying to figure out what to look for in an oil paint, think about the ingredients. In terms of ingredients, most paints have 3 ingredients, though some only have 2. The first ingredient I want to talk about today is pigment. Pigment is where the color comes from. It's by far the most expensive part of the paint. Now, pigment is a powder, and that powder can be either synthetic powder made in a lab or mineral powder. Mineral powder is just crushed rocks, crushed down to a powder. Now, those rocks have to be mined and processed. That's why they're so expensive. Those ground rocks like cadmiums or cobalts or manganese are all rare metals. For example, this rock is lapis lazuli. It's mined in a mountain range called the Sangisang mountain range in Afghanistan. Make this paint, which is easily the most expensive paint. This tube here is about $150 US. $15, $150. The reason why synthetic pigment is less expensive is that it doesn't have to be mined. It's just made in a laboratory. The price does fluctuate. However, you could generally say that it's much cheaper than the mineral counterpart of the same color. There's certainly more prestige in using the mineral pigments than their synthetic counterparts, but there doesn't necessarily need to be a drop in quality. For example, in the paints that I just showed you, the ultramarine blue, the synthetic one, is much more vibrant than its mineral counterpart. Second ingredient in paint is binder. Binder is the oil in oil paint. Binder is the thing that the pigment is suspended in. If you're painting with acrylic paint, the binder is obviously not oil, it's gel medium. What's the role of binder? Well, we need a binder because the pigment is just powder and we want paint to be somewhat liquidy. The oil in oil paint is usually linseed oil, but it can be many other kinds of oil as well, like safflower oil or walnut oil or poppy oil or even coconut oil. Linseed oil is the best all-around oil. It can yellow over time though. Walnut oil can be used if you are trying to make a creamier paint. It's not very common though. You won't be able to find many paints that use walnut oil. Poppy oil can also be used. French company Charvin uses poppy oil in their paints. It's very smooth, but can take an extremely long time to dry. Safflower oil is a good kind of all-round oil, just like linseed oil. It's not as common though, but it doesn't yellow over time. And lastly, coconut oil. I know that's a thing. I've never used it, never painted with it, so I don't really feel qualified to comment on it. The better quality the oil is, the more expensive it will be. Premium brands and professional grade oil paints will use cold pressed linseed oil and it'll be completely free of impurities. That's what you should be looking for. And the third and last ingredient in oil paint is filler. Filler is basically everything else that isn't binder or pigment. Filler can include talc, wax, calcium carbonate, chalk, a number of things. Some fillers are added to improve the quality of the pigments, but mostly they're added to reduce the cost of the paint. So, as a rule, the cheaper the paint is, the more filler it has. Student grade paints, for example, have a lot of filler, whereas professional grade paints have barely any. In fact, Michael Harding and Old Holland paint have no additives or filler whatsoever. Let's talk about recommendations. My recommendation, if you're just starting to paint, would be to avoid student grade paint altogether. Start with a professional grade paint on the lower end. There's a whole range of professional grade paints. Some of the lower end ones are very, very affordable. I would say best bang for your buck, it's a professional grade paint, a little bit of filler and additives, but not much, very high pigment load as well, is Gamblin Paint. They're out of Portland in the USA. They make an incredible paint, well worth the price. I'd also recommend Kama Pigments out of Montreal, Canada. If you have a little more money to spend, I would recommend jumping right to the super premium brands Michael Harding out of the UK and Old Holland. If you have decided that you want to stay with a student grade paint and not go to that professional grade paint, maybe it's because you want to keep things casual, or you want to keep your price down, or maybe you have a style that requires a lot of paint. Either way, if you want to go with student grade, I do have some recommendations, two in fact. The first one is Gamblin's student grade brand. It's called Gamblin 1980. And the other one is Winsor Newton's student grade brand, and that's called Winton. In both cases, they have high pigment loads for student grade paints. Still a little bit low, there is a lot of filler, but those are the best of the student grade paints, in my opinion. If you learned something about paint today, please do consider subscribing, liking, comment, and sharing. It really does help me out. Happy painting.